This is a video that I feel I owe to all my subscribers. In fact, I feel that I owe this video to everyone whom I've ever met. Actually, even if you've never heard of me until now, you may find that you can relate to the things mentioned in this video, that you have undergone a journey similar to mine. Even if you haven't, you may still find yourself taking to heart some, or perhaps all, of what this video will cover. In recent years, I have gained new perspectives on various things and have undergone quite a shift in my overall worldview. I will now take some time to explain these changes, the reasons for these changes, and the process by which these changes came to be. There was a period of time in my life, I'd say about a 3-year period of time in my life, where I was taken in by anti-government propaganda and anti-government cynicism, and I allowed anti-government cynics to convince me of their worldview. And during that time, I bought into a lot of narratives. Some of these narratives included global warming is a hoax, 9/11 was an inside job, JFK was taken out by the CIA, the moon landing was faked, GMOs turn our kids into zombies, all forms of gun control are evil, even basic background checks, George Soros insidiously controls all the world's governments, and a number of other conspiracy theories concerning topics ranging from Holocaust denial to chemtrails. Now, what exactly got me started down this path? What was it that got me into believing all these conspiracy theories, and why did I ever buy into this type of thinking? Well, it all began in 2012, around the time when the US Congress was considering passing 2 copyright bills, namely SOPA and PIPA. These bills threatened to usher in the most draconian era of copyright laws the world has ever seen, and because of that, I was really frustrated. The fact that the government actually believes that it is their role to ruin the lives of ordinary peaceful citizens for something as benign and victimless as file sharing is something that significantly weakened my trust in the institution of government. After all, why would sharing, one of the most basic forms of human liberty and interaction, be condemned and punished simply if it involves an electronic file, something that is simply duplicated and transferred from one computer to another or from one device to another at zero cost to anyone? It is a question that I still ask to this day. However, at the time, it dealt a major blow to my confidence in the idea that government officials make sound decisions for their people. Then one day, as I was making my way from one SOPA-related video to another on YouTube, a so-called 9/11 truth video appeared in my suggestions. It was only a 5-minute long video, so out of pure curiosity, I clicked on it. It was a humorous, entertaining 5 minutes that provoked my curiosity, so I decided to watch a few more of these 9/11 truth videos. Before I knew it, I was watching full-length documentaries, and with each one becoming more and more convinced that 9/11 actually was an inside job. Then came the Ron Paul 2012 campaign videos. As someone who has always railed against the greed of the wealthy and has always had liberal leanings on economic issues, it may seem outright bizarre that I would have been a Paul supporter at one time, but just as was the case with 9/11 theories, I had encountered plenty of compelling videos which, in time, had me buying what Paul and his supporters were selling. You see, the narrative being put forth was that the real reason for massive wealth inequality in society was mostly due to the existence of a central banking system which is largely controlled by the US Federal Reserve. According to Paul, it is the practices of quantitative easing and fractional reserve banking which lead to inflation, which disproportionately benefits the wealthy, especially the defense contractors which receive money directly from the government, and detriment the rest of society. Paul argued that the best way of tackling the issue of wealth inequality is to simply put an end to these practices, end the Fed, as he most famously said, and move to a monetary system where the value of money is always held constant, thereby completely eliminating inflation, and that money can be traded for gold and vice versa at a constant exchange rate. He called this the gold standard. Now, in fairness to Paul, there actually was some validity in some of what he was saying. Inflation does reduce the value of fiat currency, which, in some cases, can disproportionately detriment a lower or middle class working person as compared to a wealthier person. After all, if a person's wages do not increase at the pace of inflation, the person is actually getting less value for his or her labor over time. This, along with Paul's criticisms of U.S. foreign policy, are ultimately the reasons why I became a vocal supporter of his for a period of time. Not only that, as time went on, I began to view him as a trustworthy person, whom I began to give the benefit of the doubt to when he offered arguments regarding issues such as gun control. In his view, gun control was an egregious infringement of both basic human rights and the Second Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, and that citizens needed to have unrestricted and unlimited access to firearms of all types as an insurance policy of sorts, to keep the power of the government in check. From there, my curiosity kept carrying me from video to video, hearing about more theories and more narratives. Before long, checking into YouTube to catch up on all the latest spin that various talking heads wanted me to hear about became a daily routine. Simply put, I had become submersed in the so-called alt media. This went on for months. In early 2013, I was hit with some tragic news as internet freedom activist Aaron Swartz was found dead. Perhaps even more disturbing than his suicide itself was the fact that the US government had piled on him with several felony charges relating to an incident at MIT, where Aaron had simply violated the terms of service of a document repository website by creating software and using it to access too many documents too rapidly. Yes, you heard that right. He simply accessed too many documents too rapidly. The fact that the US government would make a felon out of someone and threaten that person with years of prison time for doing something so benign and completely victimless was, needless to say, very damaging to my perception of government as a trustworthy institution. After all, Aaron was one of the most, if not the most, vocal activists who helped to mobilize a grassroots movement which ultimately led to the demise, or at least the postponement, of SOPA and PIPA. As I researched more about Aaron, I learned that he had spent much of his life standing up for causes that he believed in, which always involved vocally challenging the status quo. Maybe, I thought, the real reason why Aaron was so brutally intimidated and terrorized by the US government was because they knew he was a genuine, kind-hearted person with both a passion to fight for what he believed in and an incredible talent, the ability to use source code to manipulate computer systems, and as such was seen as a legitimate threat to the power structure of the dark, corrupt rulers who secretly controlled the US government. The same secret rulers who supposedly ordered 9/11 to happen. At this point, my faith in government was on life support. How could I continue to place such steadfast trust in a group of people who seemed to, shamelessly and without any reservation, abuse its powers in such obnoxious ways? Then there are more cases similar to Aaron's. There was the case of Justin Carter, a man who was arrested, imprisoned, viciously assaulted by inmates, placed in solitary confinement, stripped naked, and placed on suicide watch, all before ever having access to so much as a trial. What was his grandiose, immense, unspeakable crime of overwhelming magnitude that prompted the government to treat him this way? Well, he had made a flippant post on Facebook, sarcastically responding to a friend who had made a joking remark about his mental state. The post in question involved Justin saying that he would deploy a firearm on school children. Obviously, this type of post is very inappropriate and should warrant a penalty of some sort. But does it truly warrant the person who made it to be detained and treated as a terrorist? After all, Justin was not in any way, shape, or form serious about actually following through with the mentioned action, nor did he provide any specifics whatsoever about places or times. Clearly, the way the government handled this situation could be accurately described as a blatant overreaction. A citizen was treated in a terroristic way simply because he posted a scary-sounding joke on social media. A similar case to this was the case of Brandon Robe, a man who was arrested for simply posting comments on social media that the government deemed to be threatening. There were cases in addition to those. Barrett Brown was threatened with up to 100 years in prison for being loosely involved with a hack of emails from a private company and issuing a death threat to a police officer. Catherine Olenek and Matthew Duran were detained and held in solitary confinement for simply refusing to comply with a subpoena. This list is not exhaustive. Fast forward a few more months to arrive at the time when Edward Snowden drops a bombshell regarding mass bulk surveillance of all citizen phone calls, emails, and texts by the NSA. My trust in government had hit a new low, and because of this, I became very prone to believing just about any narrative which involved the government secretly engaging in nefarious activities. As time went on, I kept watching more and more videos, and with each one becoming more and more terrified about the world I lived in. These videos would cover topics such as GMOs, chemtrails, the Holocaust, Zionism, JFK, the IPCC, Al Gore, Agenda 21, George Soros, the New World Order, and the Bilderbergs. Hearing about all these issues put me in a very dark state of mind. I was sad, confused, scared, frustrated, tired, and bewildered all at the same time. What was I to make of the situation? Would I have to live my entire life in constant fear of being at the mercy of psychopaths who would detain me at any time and brand me as a criminal for making the slightest legal misstep, or even for expressing my political beliefs? Had the planet really been turned into one giant concentration camp, insidiously yet totally controlled by a cabal of billionaires? Were we really getting sprayed with chemicals dumped from airplanes and being secretly sold Frankenfoods in grocery stores? Was any vision for a positive, joyful, liberated future for humanity nothing more than an unattainable pipe dream? I figured that, despite the bleak outlook, there was still some hope for the future and for humanity. I figured that those of us who were aware of these issues just needed to do more to make the rest of the public aware of what was going on. And then hopefully one day humanity would rise up in anger and frustration against the rulers and put a stop to them. Spurred by this hope, I spent many months plastering my social media accounts with links to so-called alt-media websites, blogs, and videos which discuss these issues. These efforts proved to be fruitless, as no one in my life cared to watch any of the videos or read any of the blogs. I was frustrated by this, but I was determined to keep trying to spread the word, so I started taking to online forums to spread the content to more people. This mainly resulted in most people simply dismissing me as a wingnut, crackpot, tinfoil hat-wearing loon, and other such names. A few people, though, actually did take the time to engage with me and discuss the issues I was raising. They tried to tell me that these videos and blogs contained unsubstantiated claims, that is, statements which they simply asserted to be true without providing a proper and full analysis of those statements. When told this, I simply shrugged it off. I figured the bloggers and the video makers were well researched and would not share information without first rigorously checking to make sure the information was correct. I found it extremely unlikely that these people would risk their personal credibility by spreading narratives on such important matters without first doing their due diligence and fully researching the topics at hand. I remained convinced that these sources were sound and trustworthy. Then one day, after I had shared a 9/11 documentary on a forum, one of the posters posted a link to a website and encouraged me to read through its pages. The link led me to a website called 911myths.com. Before clicking on the link, I thought to myself, this is probably just another site created by shills funded by the government to cover up their false flag operations. I clicked on the site and quickly glanced through some of the pages. Initially, I became quite hostile towards the site, dismissing it as a giant, cleverly crafted cover story designed to protect the evildoers within the US government who were responsible for 9/11. However, over the course of many weeks thereafter, I slowly but surely gave the site some honest consideration and began the process of thoroughly reading through some of the pages of the site. As time went on, and as I was willing to be honest with myself, I began to find that, one by one, the claims made by the so-called 9/11 truthers were shown to be either lies, information taken out of context, or partial bits of information that left out other bits of information which were also relevant to the situation. Slowly, page by page, piece by piece, I found that the case for 9/11 being an inside job was beginning to crumble. And eventually, it capsized altogether. As I read more and more of the site, it became apparent to me that I had no choice but to admit that I had got it so wrong. The actual truth is that 9/11 was probably not an inside job. Making this about-face was a difficult and painful thing to do, as it meant that I had to face a very uncomfortable and disturbing reality, that I had wasted a lot of time spreading incomplete and misleading information, and, in the eyes of many people, damaged my credibility in the process. However, this was not the first time in my life that I had made a major about-face. You see, from the time that I was an infant, I had been indoctrinated into the cult known as the Catholic Church, and it wasn't until I'd reached early adulthood that I began to see both the Catholic Church and all religions, in general, as the hoaxes they are. Not surprisingly, it was not any family member who encouraged me to do some research on the history of the Church, or the fact that there is no scientific evidence of any kind for the existence of any supernatural being, God or otherwise. No, this is research that I had only began to undertake when receiving this advice from someone outside of my religious family and religious schooling system. As you might expect, I was a devout follower of my religious beliefs as a child and as a teenager, having gone through all of these so-called holy sacraments that the cult puts its subjects through. I would say daily prayers, attend weekly mass, give up certain pleasures such as chocolate and video games for Lent. I would follow the 10 Commandments at all times, terrified that I would be damned to hell for all eternity if I had broken any of them. If I had committed any violation, I would be sure to confess it at the next monthly reconciliation session. Furthermore, when dealing with the general public, I would shame anyone who didn't follow the rules of the Bible. For example, those who had sexual relations before marriage, or those who took the Lord's name in vain, as undisciplined, selfish people who were too caught up in their own conveniences and impulses to do the right thing. I was convinced that they would all burn in hell one day and beg for forgiveness. Needless to say, eventually coming to grips with the fact that I had got things so wrong for so long was an extremely difficult and painful process. However, in time, I was able to realize that I had been brainwashed from a very early age to believe in fictional stories from a fictional book and continued to be so terrified by the thought of eternal damnation that I had better not so much as even ask for actual evidence for the church's teachings. In other words, I had finally realized that it wasn't my fault that I had been misled and had fallen so hard for the bogus narratives which had been mongered to me. So then you might ask, why had I not learned my lesson? Why had I once again allowed myself to be taken in by dubious narratives? Why had I not been more skeptical of what these alt-media talking heads were saying to me? The answer is that my experience with religion had actually had the opposite effect on me. Instead of making me more committed towards thoroughly and meticulously researching claims that people make, it had instead made me more cemented into the belief that people in positions of power and influence always abuse their powers to take advantage of other people any chance they get. This, in turn, made it much easier for me to accept the notion that the US government had made 9/11 happen for the purpose of spurring the American people into embracing their foreign policy agenda, and at the same time having an excuse to erode civil liberties. Then, like dominoes, I fell for one conspiracy theory after another. Because these talking heads had convinced me that 9/11 was an inside job, I would tend to also give them the benefit of the doubt on many of their other theories because I saw these people as trustworthy. However, just as I learned that I had got it wrong regarding 9/11, before long I learned that I had also got it wrong about the idea of global warming being a hoax. My turning point on that particular issue was the day that I had discovered the YouTube channel Potholer54 and watched several of his videos in their entirety. I found that, just like with 9/11, most of the claims made by the global warming skeptics were incomplete and conveniently left out other relevant facts and data. As such, they were misleading at best. However, at this point I felt it prudent to also be skeptical of Potholer54 as well, so I remained on the fence for a while. The true tipping point was the day I simply realized something that should have been so obvious the entire time. Those who are saying that gas emissions from fossil fuel burning and other sources should not be regulated, restricted, or taxed in any way are the same people who see no problem with any amount of toxic, life-destroying, ecology-ravaging, cancer-causing substances being spewed directly into the one and only atmosphere that we, as human beings, can rely upon as a habitable place to live. If there is a conspiracy here, it is much more likely to be among the rapacious fossil fuel industry executives, not among the vast majority of the world's climate scientists. Then I continued researching, only to find that several other conspiracy theories that I had believed in were actually dubious at best. So, what exactly do I make of this journey? What has it taught me? More than anything, it has taught me that it is a serious mistake to watch a YouTube video or read a blog and simply take for granted the validity of the claims and/or the completeness of the information presented. It has also taught me that no matter how relatable, benign, innocent-looking, harmless, soft-spoken, or well-intended a person may come across, on the internet or anywhere else for that matter, the fact is that anyone, yes, anyone, could be sharing incomplete, misleading, or outright false information to you. And in many cases, these people may not even be aware of the dubious nature of the content they are sharing with you. Furthermore, it is entirely possible that any given person may be a shill, secretly funded by anything from a political think tank to a foreign government, to spread misleading propaganda. Admittedly, this also means that even your own government could be engaging in this activity as well, which certainly does complicate matters. So then, how do you know who to trust? How can you tell who is telling you the truth and who is sharing bad information? Unfortunately, the answer is that you can never be completely sure in any given case. But overall, my advice to you is simply this. Take a look at what we know for sure is happening in the world, and decide for yourself whether or not you are content with the status quo. Take a look at poverty, wealth inequality, suicide rates, pollution, deforestation, religious dogma, the perpetual cycle of war, ongoing global political tensions, and most of all, consider how such a tiny sliver of the world's population live like kings, while the rest of the world struggles with major problems that never seem to go away, and somehow only ever seem to get worse over time. More than anything, what this journey has taught me is that it is much more fruitful to fight for causes where there is no speculation involved than to spend all of our time speculating about hypotheticals and accusations which can't be proven. Don't get me wrong, conspiracies sometimes do happen, and not all conspiracy theories are false. Some examples of real government conspiracies include the Gulf of Tonkin deception, the Tuskegee and Guatemala syphilis experiments, Project MKUltra, the Naira testimony, Operation Northwoods, and others. That being said, it is a mistake to assume that all conspiracy theories that allege government wrongdoing are automatically true simply because of a general feeling that government can't be trusted. The reality is that governments are large, complicated entities which are typically comprised of all types of people. Genuinely kind-hearted people who truly want to do what is best for citizens, nefarious types who are only in it for their selfish interests, and everything in between. It is far too simplistic to simply say that government is inherently good or inherently bad. Government, while currently flawed in some ways, is an institution that plays an important role in any society that is at least somewhat well-functioning because it provides stability and a rule of law. Instead of generally demonizing government as an institution, we should be focusing on how to correct, or at least reduce, its flaws. I believe that the best way to go about doing this is to study what the current economic system does to a person's psyche, which in turn may cause that person to act in nefarious or at least selfish ways once that person takes public office. Furthermore, I believe that the root of the entire problem is actually the fact that we live in a society which places us all at the mercy of an economic system which uses human beings as commodities for the sole purpose of maximizing economic growth. In other words, maximizing the output of things we don't need, and tosses people aside like garbage as soon as it does not see them as useful for its purposes. Perhaps, then, it is actually no surprise at all that many politicians act in ways that decay the public's trust in government as an institution. After all, these people have been submersed their entire lives in a dog-eat-dog, I don't mind 'cause you don't matter type of culture, and are just treating the world the way the world has treated them throughout their entire lives. Friends, my message to you is this. If you, like me, envision a world where human beings are not seen as mere commodities, pawns, burdens, hungry mouths, but are instead seen as dignified beings who are full of potential and yearn for a world economy which is not built on the pillars of blackmail and exploitation, but is rather built on the pillars of love, synergy, and cooperation, I hope that you will see that there is one shining hope on the horizon. If there is one thing that you can do to make your country and, quite honestly, the world a better place, it is that you can become an advocate for universal, basic income. Write to your elected officials insisting that it be implemented in your country as soon as possible. The time has come for us to, it is long overdue, that we say no to cynicism and yes to progress. Say no to narcissism and say yes to generosity. Say no to religious dogma and yes to science. Say no to consumerism and say yes to protecting and nurturing the one and only home we have. We do that by developing a level of respect for each other as human beings. After all, given the point that we currently are at as a species, we can't afford not to. Thank you for listening.